They say the code of conduct says that SCOTUS should avoid impropriety, and federal law requires the disqualification of the Supreme Court justice. Wow. So they're going to try to throw them out using the law. I was not even aware of the upside down flag until it was called to my attention. As soon as I saw it, I asked my wife to take it down, but for several days, she refused. Man, it's spicy in that Alito household. Honey, you have to take that down. I'm a Supreme Court judge. Our country's stolen. Get out of here. We're not meeting with you losers, all right? Stop your whining. Democrats get slapped by the Supreme Court. Judge Alito, Judge Roberts say, no thanks. We're not going to be meeting with you weirdos. There was a letter that came from Senators Whitehouse and Durbin over from the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're very upset that Justice Alito has flags, and his wife likes to fly those flags on their property. Some people saw those flags, said, you're an insurrectionist, and you have to recuse yourself from the Supreme Court on the Trump cases because you're helping him steal the country. And this has been part of a coordinated attack by the Democrats. They don't like when things don't go their way, so they just use raw power to remove their opponents. They've gone after Clarence Thomas. Now Alito's on the list. We saw what they did to Kavanaugh and so on. But here is what the Democrats said, because these two Supreme Court justices just ripped them in response. Alito responds, Judge Robert responds, and Raskin continues to plot on how to remove them anyways using the DOJ and other government tools. So we'll talk about that and what they're plotting. But here is the letter that came out from the Democrats. Just share this with you quickly. It's on May 23rd from these weird Democrats, Durbin and others on the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate. You see Durbin and Whitehouse, who I think's wife is a member of a racist club, pretty sure. So those are the two senators who sent this letter, and they're just whining and complaining. Dear John Roberts, Chief Justice, we write regarding a New York Times post that there was a flag on Judge Alito's yard associated with the J6 attack on the Capitol. And we urge you to take appropriate steps to ensure that Judge Alito will recuse himself from any cases related to Trump. I think they know they're going to get the old immunity decision, including the question of former president's immunity from prosecution in the upcoming decision. We also renew our calls for SCOTUS to adopt an enforceable code of conduct. And this is the big ask. We respectfully ask for a meeting. They didn't even say respectfully. I inserted that. Should have known I was talking about Democrats here. We want to meet with you as soon as possible in your capacity as Chief Justice and as the presiding officer of the Judicial Conference to discuss additional steps to address the SCOTUS crisis. They said by displaying or permitting a display of a symbol of Stop the Steal flag, which was a symbol of a flag that George Washington used, they say he violated his code of conduct. He created reasonable doubt as to his impartiality in certain proceedings, which is a wild standard. Do you think that they would apply that same standard to Judge Merchan, Judge Kaplan, Judge Chutkan? I don't think so. According to photos and contemporaneous reports, there was a flag for several days at the Alito house. It was the Appeal to Heaven flag. And you've seen this floating around. It's got the pine tree, I believe, that represents New England. And it has Appeal to Heaven, which references John Locke. So Appeal to Heaven is an homage to that. John Locke and New England was displayed outside another of Justice's residence. Now, this was after these flags were part of the Stop the Steal campaign. And so in a statement, Alito said that the flag was placed there by Mrs. Alito. And Alito also spoke to Fox News and indicated that the flag was flown upside down in response to his neighbor's display of political signage. And so they are upset. They say the code of conduct says that SCOTUS should avoid impropriety, and federal law requires the disqualification of the Supreme Court justice. Wow. So they're going to try to throw them out using the law. We'll see what Raskin says. SCOTUS also prohibits its employees, who are employees, from engaging in partisan activity. That prohibition also applies broadly. And so by displaying this flag, the Appeal to Heaven flag, Alito actively engaged in political activity, failed to avoid the appearance of impropriety. He created a reasonable doubt. And these are only the recent instances. In fact, in 2023, he opined about the constitutionality of certain legislation in the Senate. And so Thomas has also participated in J6 stuff. His wife's involvement is also problematic, and he failed to disclose debt forgiveness and other things. The rule of law is founded on these propositions, and so we call for Justice Alito to recuse himself immediately. Sincerely, Dick Durbin and racist Senator Whitehouse. We now have a response. So, Judge Alito, from his chambers on May 29th, responds to these two senators. He says, all right, dear Honorable so-called Richard and Sheldon. Dear Senators, this is in response to your letter to me, requesting that I take in steps to ensure that I recuse myself from this upcoming case. Now, as the court has pointed out, individual justices rather than the court decide recusal issues. So we appreciate you writing to Chief Justice Roberts, but you should have been writing to me. I am therefore responding directly to your letter. In it, you claim 2 incidents involving the flying of the flags that created an appearance of impropriety that requires my recusal. Here's what the code says. A justice is presumed impartial and has an obligation to sit unless disqualified. A justice should disqualify himself or herself in a proceeding in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned, where an unbiased and reasonable person who is aware of all relevant circumstances would doubt that the justice could fairly discharge his or her duties. Now, the 2 incidents you cite there, Sheldon, do not meet the conditions for recusal. I have therefore an obligation to sit under the rules. Now, the first incident you cited in your letter concerns the flying of an upside-down flag outside the house in Virginia where my wife and I reside. In considering whether this event requires recusal, an unbiased and reasonable person would take into account the following facts. As I've already stated publicly, I had nothing whatsoever to do with flying that flag. I was not even aware of the upside-down flag until it was called to my attention. As soon as I saw it, I asked my wife to take it down, but for several days, she refused. Man, it's spicy in that Alito household. Honey, you have to take that down. I'm a Supreme Court judge. Our country's stolen, so it stays up. All right, I guess I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. Even Supreme Court justices are sleeping on the couch. My wife and I own our Virginia home jointly. It's hers. She's a strong, independent woman. Don't you love that, Democrats? No, they don't, actually. They don't. They say that, but they don't. They love dumb, compliant women. She therefore has the legal right to use the property as she sees fit, and there were no additional steps that I could have taken to have my flag taken down more promptly. What do you want me to do? Go get an injunction against her? My wife's reason for flying the flag are not relevant for the present purposes, but I note that she was greatly distressed at the time, in large part due to a very nasty neighborhood dispute in which I had no involvement, neighbors. A house on the street displayed a sign attacking her personally, okay? So her rotten liberal neighbors are monsters, and a man who was living in the house at the time trailed her all the way down the street and berated her in my presence using foul language, including what I regard as the vilest epithet that can be addressed to a woman. I think we know what that one is. It says, my wife is a private citizen, and she possesses the same First Amendment rights as every other American. She makes her own decisions, and I have always respected her right to do so. Good husband. Now, she has made many sacrifices to accommodate my services on the Supreme Court, amazing wife, including the insult of having to endure numerous loud, obscene, personally insulting protests in front of our home that continue to this day and that the DOJ does nothing about, and now threaten to escalate. I am confident that a reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or a desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases like you would conclude that the events recounted above do not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I am therefore required to reject your stupid request, my word. Now, the second incident concerns a flag bearing the legend, "An Appeal to Heaven," that flew in our backyard of our vacation home, summer 2023. I recall that my wife did fly that flag for some period of time, but I do not remember how long it flew. And what is most relevant here is I had no involvement in the decision to fly that flag. My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not. My wife was solely responsible for having flagpoles put up at our residence and our vacation home, and has flown a wide variety of flags over the years, which I actually think is super cool. I think that's just awesome. Like, that's amazing. Like, I would love to go visit Mrs. Alito and hear her tell me about all of her flags. I could spend a whole day doing that. I'm not even kidding. Let's have some lemonade. Tell me about that one. What's that one? Okay, let me Wikipedia that. All day. I could spend all day. In addition to the American flag, she has flown other patriotic flags, including a favorite flag thanking veterans. There's a story to all of these. You read on where they come from, how long have they been around, and they're like symbolism. They're like flashcards for success and meaning and purpose. They're just great. College flags, flags supporting sports teams, state and local flags, flags of nations from which ancestors of family members came from, flags of places we visited, seasonal flags, religious flags. I was not familiar with an Appeal to Heaven flag when my wife flew it. She may have mentioned that it dates back to the American Revolution. It does. And I assume she was flying it to express a religious and patriotic message. I was not aware of any connection between this historic flag and the Stop the Steal movement. And neither was my wife. She did not fly it to associate herself with that or any other group. And the use of an old historic flag by a new group does not necessarily drain that flag of all other meanings. As I said in reference to the other flag event, my wife is an independently minded private citizen. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so. Our vacation home was purchased with money she inherited from her parents and is titled in her name. It is a place away from Washington where she should be able to relax. A reasonable person who's not motivated by TDS or a desire to affect the outcome of the Supreme Court would conclude that this event does not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I am therefore duty-bound to reject your recusal request. Sincerely yours, Samuel Alito. So I take your request and reject it. You can now shove it and get out of my office. So very nice letter, standing up for his wife, Mrs. Alito, flying her flags proudly. Boy, let them flop in the wind. A very nice letter from great Supreme Court Justice and an amazing husband and an amazing wife. What a nice household. So we also have now Chief Justice Roberts responding in kind. Now that Judge Alito gave Durbin and White House the old proverbial backhand, Chief Justice Roberts settles this case as well. Derby and Whitey are now getting a letter from Chief Justice Roberts in regard to questions concerning any justice's participations in pending cases. The members of the Supreme Court recently reaffirmed the practice we followed for 235 years, pursuant to which individual justices decide recusal issues. See our rules. It's my understanding that Justice Alito has sent you a letter addressing this subject. I haven't even read it. Don't even care. I must respectfully decline your request for a meeting. I don't want to have lunch with you. As noted in my letter to Chairman Durbin last April, apart from ceremonial events, only on rare occasions in our nation's history has a sitting Chief Justice met with legislators, even in a public setting like a committee hearing, with members of both major parties present. Separation of power concerns and the importance of preserving judicial independence against such appearances caution against doing this. Moreover, the format proposed, a meeting with leaders of only one party who have expressed an interest in matters currently pending before the court, simply underscores that participating in such a meeting would be inadvisable. Also copied Lindsey Graham on that one. Signed, Chief Justice Roberts. So get out of here. We're not meeting with you losers, all right? Stop your whining and leave us alone. We have that not happening. Raskin will not leave them alone. In fact, he wants to force them to be recused. Here's his stupid opinion piece in the New York Times. He says, how to force Justices Alito and Thomas to recuse themselves no matter what. He says, many people have gloomily accepted the wisdom that they're going to be on the case, but they're wrong. It seems unfathomable that they could be on the case. Everyone assumes nothing could be done, but guess what? Maybe that we can. He says the DOJ, including the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, an appointed U.S. Special Counsel, all of whom were involved in different ways in criminal prosecutions, can petition the other 7 justices to require them to recuse themselves. Says that the Attorney General of the United States can invoke U.S. Code. He says the Constitution and the federal statute. This is so dumb. So they're going to use a statute that Congress passed, and then the executive will also use the Constitution, the Due Process Clause, to say that they have to recuse. Says the Constitution has come into play in several recent SCOTUS decisions. It requires biased judges throughout the federal system to recuse themselves, saying the Constitution and the statutes, which are not in the Constitution, the statutes are subordinate law. Constitution reigns supreme. The Constitution and the federal laws under it is the supreme law of the land. Yeah, but as long as they don't conflict with the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Federal laws do not override that, no matter how hard they try. So they want to, to bootstrap the federal law. They're going to use the Due Process Clause to say the federal statutes justify forced recusal. They say this is a recusal statute. If triggered, it's not a friendly suggestion. It's Congress's command. It's binding on the justices, just like the Due Process Clause is. So dumb. He's so dumb. The Supreme Court cannot disregard this law. Okay, tell them that. Ignoring it would trespass on the constitutional separation of powers because the justices would essentially be saying that they have the power to override a congressional command. They can, yeah. If it's not in the Constitution, they're obligated to override a congressional command. They think that they're Congress, they can just pass the statute, it overrides everything. No, if it conflicts with the Constitution, that's what the court does. The court says what the law is. And so if this law conflicts, that's a problem for them. Now, when the arguments are properly before the court, they say Roberts and others will have a constitutional obligation to recuse. And so they're saying that they're going to try to force this through. So if they get rid of Thomas and Alito, then it's now going to be basically much higher possibility. You would just need one judge to flip and join the left. So very precarious position that we are in, my friends. Now, this is something that we're going to be continuing to cover. Democrats get slapped down bigly by the Supreme Court. Alito says, we're going to fly our flag no matter what, and shout out to Mrs. Alito. Supreme Court going to be making some big decisions on immunity coming very soon. Hopefully you're subscribed and liking this video so that you can join us when that coverage comes. And if you enjoyed this video, we've got another great segment coming up here on another Trump case. You're going to want to see it because there are always exciting updates in this one. Check it out. We'll see you over there.